The sound of breaking glass echoed through the small ranch house as Lillian Rose stared at her brother in disbelief. The shattered remains of her mother's cherished teacup scattered across the wooden floor like her own broken dreams. "You did what?" she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper as she gripped the edge of the worn kitchen table, her knuckles turning white. William Rose, 6 years her senior and self-appointed head of their family since their parents' passing 2 winters ago, stood his ground with arms crossed over his broad chest. "I promised you to George Harrington," he repeated, more firmly this time. "He'll be arriving from Boston next week to make you his wife." Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. "I'm not a piece of property to be bartered away, William. How could you?" "It's done, Lily," William said, his tone softening slightly as he used her childhood nickname. "The ranch is failing. We're 3 months behind on the banknotes. Harrington offered to clear all our debts in exchange for your hand. He's wealthy, respectable, and 45 years old." Lillian cried, recalling the portly banker who had visited their small Montana ranch 6 months prior, eyeing her like a prized mare at auction. The year was 1878, and at 21, Lillian had long resigned herself to spinsterhood, not by choice but by circumstance. After their parents died of influenza in 76, she and William had struggled to maintain the family ranch. Most eligible men in Whispering Pines sought wives who wouldn't bring the burden of a failing property. "I won't do it," she declared, her green eyes flashing with defiance. "You had no right." William slammed his fist on the table. "No right? Who's been keeping this roof over our heads? Who's been breaking his back from dawn till dusk trying to save what Pa built?" Guilt washed over Lillian, momentarily dampening her anger. William had sacrificed much, working himself to exhaustion. "But this was too far. Give me 2 months," she pleaded. "The cattle drive to Helena is coming. I can help. We can earn enough to." William laughed bitterly. "With what cattle? We've got 17 head left, Lily. 17. The drought took the rest. Harrington is our only hope." Lillian turned away, tears stinging her eyes. "I'd rather die than marry that man." "Well, that's not your choice anymore." William grabbed his hat from the hook by the door. "Harrington arrives on Tuesday's stage. You have 4 days to accept your future. I'm riding to town." The door slammed behind him, leaving Lillian alone with her shock and rage. She sank into a chair, trembling hands covering her face. Her life, her future bartered away without her consent. She thought of Harrington with his sweaty palms and fetid breath, imagining those hands upon her body, and shuddered violently. No, she would not accept this fate. Moving with sudden purpose, Lillian hurried to her small bedroom. She pulled her carpet bag from beneath the bed and began stuffing it with essentials: 2 dresses, undergarments, her mother's silver hairbrush. From beneath the loose floorboard under her bed, she retrieved the small leather pouch containing $15, her secret savings from selling eggs and quilts in town over the past year. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Lillian changed quickly into her sturdiest dress, laced up her boots, and threw her father's old oilskin coat around her shoulders. The spring evenings were still cold in Montana territory. Grabbing a handful of dried beef and biscuits from the kitchen, she hesitated only briefly before taking William's hunting knife from the shelf and securing it in her boot. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Lillian slipped out to the stable. There were only 2 horses left: William's stallion, Thunder, and her own mare, Penny. She saddled Penny with practiced hands, whispering soothingly to the chestnut horse, "We're leaving, girl, just you and me." After securing her belongings, Lillian mounted and urged Penny toward the western trail. She had a cousin in Idaho who might take her in, at least temporarily. It was several days hard riding, but better than the alternative. She didn't look back at the only home she'd ever known. 2 days of hard riding later, Lillian's provisions were dwindling, and her body ached from hours in the saddle. She'd pushed Penny harder than she should have, fear of pursuit driving her forward despite the mare's obvious fatigue. The western Montana landscape stretched endlessly before her, rolling hills covered in spring grasses, dotted with pine and aspen groves. Under different circumstances, she might have found it beautiful. Now, it seemed only vast and unforgiving. As dusk fell on the second day, Lillian spotted a thin trail of smoke rising from a copse of trees near a winding stream. She hesitated, weighing the risks of approaching strangers against her need for rest and food. Her meager supplies would not last another day. Decision made, she guided Penny toward the campsite. As she approached, she could make out a lone figure tending a small fire. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, crouched by the flames. A horse, a magnificent black gelding, grazed nearby. Lillian's approach did not go unnoticed. Before she could announce herself, the man was on his feet, revolver drawn and pointed in her direction. "That's far enough," he called, his voice deep and steady. Lillian reined Penny to a stop, raising her hands to show they were empty. "I mean no harm," she called back. "I saw your fire and—" She trailed off, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was, a woman alone on the frontier. The man studied her for a long moment, then slowly lowered his weapon. "Approach slowly," he instructed. As Lillian drew closer, she could make out his features in the firelight. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps late 20s, with a strong jawline shadowed by several days' worth of stubble. His eyes, piercing even in the dim light, assessed her warily. "You're a long way from anywhere," he observed, holstering his revolver but keeping his hand near it. "I could say the same of you," Lillian replied, attempting to keep her voice steady despite her exhaustion. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Fair enough." He gestured to the fire. "Dismount if you'd like. I've got coffee and rabbit stew." The offer of hot food was too tempting to resist. Lillian carefully climbed down from Penny's back, her legs nearly buckling beneath her after so many hours in the saddle. She steadied herself against the mare's flank, hoping the stranger hadn't noticed her weakness. "Name's Wade Garrison," he said, returning his attention to the pot bubbling over the fire. "Most folks call me Garrison." "Lillian Rose," she replied, then immediately regretted giving her real name. If William sent men looking for her, it would make her easier to track. If Wade noticed her hesitation, he didn't comment on it. Instead, he gestured to a fallen log near the fire. "Have a seat, Miss Rose. Your horse could use some rest." Lillian unsaddled Penny, giving the tired mare a thorough rubdown before leading her to water. All the while, she kept Wade in her peripheral vision, assessing the potential threat. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to life on the frontier, but there was something in his bearing that suggested formal training. "Are you a lawman?" she asked abruptly as she returned to the fire. Wade looked up from the stew he was stirring, one eyebrow raised. "What makes you ask? The way you stand. The way you were aware of my approach before I made a sound." He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. "Observant." "No, not a lawman, not anymore at least. I was a Union captain in the war, then a Texas Ranger for a few years after. Now I'm just a man making his way west." Lillian accepted the tin cup of coffee he offered, wrapping her cold fingers around its warmth. "What brings you to Montana territory?" "Work," he replied simply. "I'm scouting new grazing land for a cattle outfit out of Wyoming." He ladled stew into a bowl and handed it to her. "And what brings a young woman to be riding alone in this wilderness, Miss Rose? It's not safe." Lillian stared into her bowl, weighing how much to share. "I'm visiting family in Idaho," she said finally. A partial truth. Wade's eyes, a striking shade of blue-gray, studied her face. "Must be urgent family business to have you riding so hard. Your mare's nearly spent." Heat rose to Lillian's cheeks. "Penny will be fine after a good rest." "And you? Will you be fine too?" His voice had softened, genuine concern replacing suspicion. Something in his tone, or perhaps it was simply exhaustion breaking down her defenses, made Lillian's eyes fill with tears. She blinked them away furiously, focusing on the steaming stew. "I will manage, Mr. Garrison. I always do." Wade didn't press further, an act of kindness Lillian appreciated more than he could know. They ate in companionable silence as night fully descended around them. The stew was surprisingly good, seasoned with wild herbs that complemented the gamey rabbit meat. "You cook well for a former soldier," Lillian remarked, scraping the last bite from her bowl. Wade's mouth quirked. "When you've eaten army rations for years, you learn to make do with whatever's available." As they cleaned up after the meal, Lillian's exhaustion became overwhelming. She swayed slightly on her feet, and Wade's hand shot out to steady her, gripping her elbow. "You need rest," he said firmly. "Take my bedroll, I'll keep watch." "I couldn't possibly, I insist," he interrupted. "I've slept rough more nights than I can count. One more won't kill me." Too tired to argue, Lillian acquiesced. The bedroll smelled of leather, pine, and something uniquely masculine that she tried not to find comforting. As she settled beneath the wool blanket, she watched Wade through half-closed eyes as he stoked the fire. "Thank you," she murmured, already drifting toward sleep. The last thing she remembered was his quiet reply. "Get some rest, Miss Rose. Tomorrow comes early." Lillian woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings. Dawn light filtered through the trees, and the campfire had burned down to glowing embers. She sat up quickly, searching for Wade. He stood by the stream, shirt sleeves rolled up as he washed. Morning sunlight glinted off water droplets on his tanned forearms and the dark hair at the nape of his neck where it had escaped the leather thong that bound it. Lillian looked away quickly, a flush creeping up her neck at having caught him in such a private moment. She busied herself with folding the bedroll, trying to ignore the quickening of her pulse. "Good morning," Wade called, having spotted her movement. "Coffee's ready if you want some." By the time he returned to the campfire, Lillian had composed herself. She accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling its rich aroma. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, noticing the shadows beneath his eyes. "Enough," he replied with a shrug. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a package wrapped in waxed paper. Biscuits, not fresh but edible. They broke their fast in silence, Lillian increasingly aware that she would soon need to continue her journey. The thought of riding alone again filled her with unexpected dread. "Where are you headed next, Mr. Garrison?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "North toward Helena, eventually, but I'm in no particular hurry." He studied her face. "Your family in Idaho, they expecting you on a certain day?" Lillian looked down at her cup. "No. They don't actually know I'm coming." Wade nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question, and Lillian saw no point in denying it. "Someone," she corrected softly. "Husband." When she shook her head, he continued. "Father, brother." "Brother," she admitted. He promised me to a man I cannot marry." Wade's expression darkened. "Promised you, like property, to settle debts," Lillian explained, the words tumbling out now that she'd begun. "Our ranch is failing. The man, George Harrington, offered to clear all our debts in exchange for my hand. William accepted without consulting me. And this Harrington, what sort of man is he? Old, cold, looks at me like." She shuddered. "He's arriving today or tomorrow to claim me. That's why I left." Wade was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed her story. "Your brother had no right," he said finally, his voice hard. "He thought he was saving our home," Lillian said, surprised to find herself defending William despite her anger. "By selling his sister." Wade shook his head. "No piece of land is worth that." His vehemence startled her. "You seem very certain." "I've seen what happens to women forced into such arrangements," he said grimly. "My own sister." He trailed off, pain flashing across his features before he masked it. "Well, let's just say I know." Lillian wanted to ask more but sensed it wasn't the time. Instead, she said, "I should be on my way. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Garrison." Wade looked at her searchingly. "You said your destination is Idaho." "My cousin lives near Boise," she replied. At least she did 5 years ago when she last wrote. "That's a hard journey for a woman alone," he observed, "especially one who might be pursued." Lillian stiffened. "I can take care of myself." "I don't doubt it," Wade said, raising his hands placatingly. "But even the most capable rider benefits from companionship on the trail. I'm headed to Silver Creek before turning north. It's on the way to Idaho. We could ride together that far." Lillian hesitated. While she'd found Wade to be a respectful companion thus far, she'd known him less than a day. Traveling together would mean camping together for several nights. As if reading her thoughts, he added, "I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll be safe with me. If you prefer, we can part ways at any town we pass." The sincerity in his eyes made her decision easier. "Very well, Mr. Garrison. I accept your offer of companionship to Silver Creek." They broke camp efficiently, Wade insisting on taking most of the labor despite Lillian's protests. As they mounted their horses, he gave her an appraising look. "You ride well," he commented as she easily guided Penny alongside his gelding. "I was raised on a ranch," she replied. "Been riding since before I could walk, according to my father." "Your parents, they've passed," he asked gently, 2 years ago. "Influenza took them both within a week of each other." "I'm sorry," he said, and she could tell he meant it. "It's not easy losing family." Lillian sensed there was a story behind his words but didn't pry. They rode in companionable silence for several hours, the rhythm of the horses' hooves and the vast Montana landscape soothing her frayed nerves. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses by a small brook. As Lillian refilled their canteens, Wade studied the ground with a frown. "What is it?" she asked, recognizing the concentration in his expression. "Tracks," he replied, kneeling to examine them more closely. "3 riders passed this way recently, heading east." "How recently?" "This morning, I'd guess. The dew patterns suggest they rode through after dawn." Lillian felt a chill despite the warm spring sun. "Do you think, could they be looking for me?" Wade stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Possible, or they could be any of 100 other possibilities: trappers, traders, prospectors." He met her worried gaze. "But we should be cautious. If your brother sent men after you, they'll be checking obvious routes west." "What do you suggest?" "We alter course. Head southwest through the mountains. It's rougher terrain but less traveled." Lillian nodded, trying to hide her growing fear. "Will it add much time to our journey?" "A day, perhaps 2. But better safe than captured, wouldn't you say?" They mounted again, Wade leading them away from the main trail and into denser forest. The terrain quickly became more challenging, with Penny sometimes struggling on the steeper slopes. Lillian felt guilty for pushing the mare so hard over the past days, but knew they had little choice. As afternoon waned into evening, Wade found them a sheltered spot to make camp, a small clearing nestled against a rocky outcropping that would shield them from view and wind. "It's not ideal," he apologized, "but it's defensible if needed." The casual way he mentioned potential danger sent another wave of anxiety through Lillian. "Do you really think they'll come after me?" Wade secured the horses before answering. "If I were your brother and I'd promised my sister to a man wealthy enough to save my ranch, yes, I'd send riders." He met her eyes directly. "But then I wouldn't have sold my sister in the first place." "William isn't a bad man," Lillian said softly, gathering kindling for the fire. "He's desperate. The drought last year nearly ruined us." "Desperation makes people do terrible things," Wade acknowledged, "but it doesn't excuse them." As darkness fell, they kept the fire small to avoid detection. After another meal of Wade's surprisingly competent cooking, Lillian found herself relaxing despite their circumstances. There was something about his steady presence that made her feel secure for the first time since fleeing the ranch. "Tell me about your home," Wade said as they sat side by side, watching the flames dance. Lillian smiled wistfully. "Whispering Pines Ranch. It's not much compared to some 800 acres in the Gallatin Valley, but it's beautiful. Rolling grasslands with pine forests to the north and east. A creek runs through the property, clear and cold even in summer. Sounds peaceful." "It was. When my parents were alive, it thrived. We had over 200 head of cattle, good horses. My mother kept gardens that were the envy of every woman in the county." Her smile faded. "After they died, everything seemed to fall apart. The drought came, sickness took some of our best breeding stock. William worked himself to exhaustion trying to save it. And you, what was your role?" "I kept the house, helped with the cattle when needed. Took over Mother's gardens, though mine never flourished like hers." Lillian stared into the fire. "I tried to convince William to let me find work in town to bring in extra money, but he wouldn't hear of it. Said no sister of his would work as a shop girl or seamstress." "Yet he'd sell you to a man 3 times your age," Wade observed dryly. Lillian winced. "He doesn't see it that way. He thinks he's securing my future." "And what do you want for your future, Lillian Rose?" Wade's voice had softened, her name on his lips sending an unexpected shiver through her. "Freedom," she answered without hesitation. "The chance to choose my own path, maybe even love someday." Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them. Lillian looked away first, suddenly aware of how intimate their conversation had become. "We should rest," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "As you said, tomorrow comes early," Wade nodded, breaking the moment. "Take the bedroll again. I'll keep watch first half of the night, then wake you." "No," Lillian insisted. "You need rest too. Wake me in a few hours, and I'll take my turn." He looked like he might argue, but ultimately agreed. As Lillian settled into his bedroll once more, she found herself watching him through the dancing flames. He sat with his back against a tree, revolver within easy reach, his profile strong against the darkness beyond. In the short time she'd known him, Wade Garrison had shown her more respect and consideration than most men she'd encountered in her 21 years. The realization was both comforting and terrifying, for she knew their paths would soon diverge. With that troubling thought, she drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning dawned cold and gray, a spring storm brewing on the horizon. Wade and Lillian broke camp quickly, eager to cover ground before the weather turned. They rode in tense silence, both aware of the darkening sky and the possibility of pursuit. By midday, fat raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a steady downpour that soaked through their clothing despite their oilskin coats. The mountain trail became treacherous, mud making the horses' footing uncertain. "We need shelter," Wade called over the increasing roar of the rain. "There's an abandoned trapper's cabin a few miles ahead, if I remember right." Lillian nodded, too cold and miserable to speak. Her hands, numbed by rain and chill, could barely maintain their grip on Penny's reins. She focused on Wade's broad back ahead of her, following where he led. After what seemed like hours but was likely less than one, a small cabin appeared through the curtain of rain. It was little more than a one-room shack with a sagging roof, but to Lillian, it looked like salvation. Wade dismounted quickly, securing both horses beneath a lean-to attached to the cabin's eastern wall. He helped Lillian down, her legs so stiff she nearly collapsed against him. "Easy," he murmured, his arm strong around her waist as he guided her to the cabin door. Inside was musty but dry, with a small fireplace along one wall and crude furnishings: a rough-hewn table, a single chair, and a narrow cot. Wade quickly assessed the space, moving to the fireplace to check the chimney. "Seems clear," he announced. "Stay here while I get firewood and our supplies." While Wade braved the storm again, Lillian explored the tiny cabin. Dust covered every surface, but otherwise, it was in reasonable condition. She found an old broom in one corner and began sweeping, desperate for activity to warm her frozen limbs. Wade returned with an armload of relatively dry wood from beneath the lean-to and their saddlebags. He worked efficiently, building a fire that soon crackled to life, filling the small space with blessed warmth and light. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly, turning his back to offer privacy. "I'll do the same. We can hang everything by the fire to dry." Lillian hesitated only briefly before acknowledging the sense in his words. Hypothermia was a real danger, and modesty would be of little comfort if she fell ill. She changed quickly into her spare dress, which was thankfully dry in the center of her pack, though damp at the edges. "I'm decent," she announced when finished. Wade had changed into dry trousers, but remained bare-chested as he arranged their wet clothing on improvised drying racks near the fire. Lillian tried not to stare at the defined muscles of his back and shoulders, or the scars that marked his skin, evidence of a life lived hard. He pulled a fresh shirt from his pack and donned it before turning to face her. "Better?" he asked, eyes assessing her condition. Lillian nodded, rubbing her arms briskly. "Much. Thank you for remembering this place." Outside, the storm intensified, rain pounding against the cabin's roof and thunder rolling across the mountains. The small space seemed to shrink around them as they realized they'd be confined together until the weather cleared. "Hungry?" Wade asked, breaking the awkward silence. "Starving," Lillian admitted with a small smile. They shared the last of their provisions: jerky, hardtack, and coffee made with water Wade collected from the rain pouring off the roof. It wasn't a feast, but with the fire's warmth and the storm's wild music outside, it felt oddly peaceful. "Tell me about Texas," Lillian said as they sat close to the fire, their wet boots steaming nearby. Wade looked surprised by the request but obliged. "Hot, vast, beautiful in its own harsh way. I grew up on a small ranch outside San Antonio, nothing like your Montana paradise, but it was home. You have family still there, a shadow crossed his face. My parents died in a Comanche raid when I was 14. My sister Elizabeth and I were the only survivors. He paused, staring into the flames. After the war, I tried to make a go of the ranch, but it was too much for one man. When the Rangers recruited me, I sold the land. And Elizabeth, Wade's jaw tightened. She married a man named Buchanan, wealthy rancher twice her age. I was away fighting when it happened, by the time I returned. He trailed off, his expression darkening. She died in childbirth 3 years later. The bastard remarried within a month. Understanding dawned on Lillian. That's why you reacted so strongly to my situation. He nodded, meeting her eyes. I've seen what happens when women are traded like cattle. I couldn't save my sister. But perhaps I can help you avoid her fate. The raw emotion in his voice stirred something deep within Lillian, a connection that transcended their short acquaintance. I'm sorry about Elizabeth, she said softly, tentatively placing her hand on his forearm. Wade covered her hand with his own, the touch sending warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. Life is full of regrets, Miss Rose. All we can do is learn from them and try to do better. They sat in companionable silence for a time, listening to the storm rage outside. Eventually, Wade rose to check on the horses, leaving Lillian alone with her thoughts. She found herself contemplating a future she'd never considered, one where she didn't reach her cousin in Idaho, where perhaps she found a different path entirely. The notion was both exhilarating and terrifying. When Wade returned, shaking rain from his hair like a great bear, Lillian couldn't help but laugh at the sight. His answering smile transformed his face, erasing years of hardship from his features. The horses are fine, he reported, but we're not going anywhere until morning at the earliest. This storm settled in. Lillian nodded, suddenly acutely aware that they would be spending the night together in this tiny cabin. Wade seemed to realize this at the same moment, his expression growing serious. You take the cot, he said firmly. I'll make do on the floor by the fire. The cot's too short for you, Lillian protested. You'll be miserable. I've slept in worse conditions. His tone left no room for argument. As night fell, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it intensified, wind howling through the trees and rattling the cabin's single window. Despite the fire's warmth, a chill permeated the small space. Lillian lay on the cot beneath her coat and Wade's spare blanket, listening to the storm and watching Wade's silhouette as he sat by the fire, feeding it periodically. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Wade. She called softly, using his first name without thinking. He turned toward her. Yes. Will you tell me a story, something happy from before the war? He was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might refuse. Then he began speaking, his deep voice barely audible above the storm. When I was 10, my father bought a new stallion, beautiful Arabian with a coat like polished copper. No one could ride him, not my father, not the ranch hands. He threw everyone who tried. Wade's voice took on a wistful quality. I was determined to be the one to tame him. Every morning before chores, I'd visit his stall, just sit there talking to him, offering my hand. For weeks, he ignored me. What happened? Lillian prompted when he paused. One morning, he took an apple from my palm. The next day, he let me stroke his nose. A month later, I was riding him bareback across our south pasture, feeling like I could fly. Wade chuckled. My father was furious, at first thought I'd break my neck. Then he was just proud, called me a horse whisperer. Lillian smiled in the darkness, imagining a young Wade with the same determined set to his jaw. You must have been a stubborn child. Still am, he admitted. When I set my mind to something, I don't easily let go. Their eyes met across the dim cabin, and something unspoken passed between them once more. This time, neither looked away. You should sleep, Wade said finally, his voice rougher than before. So should you, Lillian replied. There's room enough for two if we're careful. As soon as the words left her mouth, she felt heat rush to her face. I understand your meaning, Wade interrupted gently, but I gave my word you'd be safe with me. Best I stay where I am. Lillian nodded, equal parts relieved and disappointed by his honorable nature. Good night, then. Good night, Lillian Rose. She closed her eyes, his voice saying her name echoing in her mind as she drifted towards sleep. In that moment, despite the storm and the uncertain future, she felt strangely at peace. Morning brought watery sunshine and a world transformed by the storm. Trees glistened with raindrops, and the air smelled of pine and wet earth. Wade had already tended the horses by the time Lillian woke, her muscles stiff from the narrow cot. "The trail will be muddy," Wade observed as they shared the last of their coffee, "but passable. We should reach Silver Creek by nightfall if we push on." Lillian felt a pang at the mention of Silver Creek. Once there, their paths would diverge, Wade continuing north to Helena, she westward to Idaho. The thought brought unexpected sadness. They gathered their belongings in companionable silence, the ease of their interactions belying their short acquaintance. As Lillian rolled the blankets, she found herself stealing glances at Wade, memorizing the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the precise angle of his jawline. They were nearly ready to depart when Wade suddenly tensed, his hand moving to his holstered revolver. He motioned for Lillian to be silent, then moved to the cabin's single window. "Riders," he murmured, his expression grim. "3 of them coming up the trail." Lillian's heart lurched. "The same ones from before. The tracks you saw, can't be sure, but timing suggests it." Wade moved with calm efficiency, checking his weapon. "Stay here, I'll handle this." "No," Lillian gripped his arm. "If they're looking for me, I won't hide behind you." Wade studied her face, then nodded reluctantly. "Stay behind me at least, and if things go badly, take my horse and ride hard for Silver Creek. Ask for Sheriff Donovan. Tell him Wade Garrison sent you." Before Lillian could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. Wade positioned himself in the cabin doorway, one hand resting casually near his revolver. 3 riders appeared in the clearing, rough-looking men with trail dust coating their clothing. The leader, a burly man with a thick beard, reined his horse to a stop when he spotted Wade. "Morning," Wade called, his posture relaxed but alert. "Morning," the bearded man replied, eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. "We're looking for a woman, young, auburn hair, traveling alone. Seen anyone matching that description?" Lillian stepped into view behind Wade, chin raised defiantly. "I'm Lillian Rose. Who's asking?" The bearded man's expression shifted to satisfaction. "Jacob Mercer, madam. Your brother William sent us to escort you home." "I'm not going home," Lillian declared firmly. Mercer exchanged glances with his companions. "Afraid that's not your decision, Miss Rose. Your brother was quite clear. You're to return immediately. Mr. Harrington is waiting." Wade's voice cut through the tension, deceptively calm. "The lady has made her choice clear." "She's not returning with you." Mercer's hand edged toward his sidearm. "This isn't your concern, mister. The woman belongs to her brother until she's married. That's the law." "She belongs to no one," Wade replied, his tone hardening, "and she promised nothing to this Harrington fellow." "You can tell her brother that." "Who the hell are you anyway?" Mercer demanded. "Wade Garrison." The name clearly meant something to the men as they exchanged uneasy glances. "The Ranger," one of them murmured. "Former Ranger," Wade corrected. "Now just a man who doesn't appreciate seeing a woman treated like property." Mercer's confidence visibly faltered, but he rallied quickly. "We've got our orders. The woman comes with us." "No," Wade said simply. "She doesn't." The standoff stretched, tension crackling like lightning. Lillian held her breath, acutely aware that violence hovered on a knife's edge. Wade stood perfectly still, his presence radiating quiet danger. Finally, Mercer backed down, his gaze shifting from Wade to Lillian. "Your brother won't take this well, Miss Rose." "Tell William I'm sorry," Lillian said, meaning it, "but I won't be sold to save the ranch." Mercer nodded curtly, then turned his horse. "Let's go, boys. This ain't worth dying over." The 3 men rode away, occasionally glancing back until they disappeared down the trail. Only then did Wade relax his posture, turning to Lillian with concern in his eyes. "Are you all right?" She nodded, surprised to find her hands steady despite the confrontation. "Yes, thank you for standing with me." "Always," he replied simply, the word carrying weight beyond its syllables. They mounted their horses and set off toward Silver Creek, following a different trail than Mercer and his men had taken. Lillian rode close beside Wade, their conversation sparse but comfortable as they navigated the muddy path. By late afternoon, the small settlement of Silver Creek came into view, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a verdant valley. Lillian felt a mixture of relief and dread as they approached. Safety, yes, but also the imminent parting of ways. "We'll get supplies here," Wade said as they rode down the town's main street. "And you can rest properly before continuing to Idaho." Lillian nodded, not trusting her voice. The thought of continuing alone no longer appealed as it once had. In just 3 days, Wade Garrison had become more than a traveling companion. He had become someone she trusted, someone she pushed the thought aside. There was no future in such feelings. They stabled their horses at the town livery, then secured rooms at the Silver Creek Hotel, modest accommodations, but luxurious compared to their recent nights on the trail. The hotel boasted a small dining room where they agreed to meet for supper after refreshing themselves. Alone in her room, Lillian bathed in lukewarm water, washing away days of trail dust. She changed into her cleanest dress and attempted to tame her auburn hair, secured with pins she'd carried from home. Looking in the spotted mirror, she hardly recognized herself. There was a new confidence in her eyes, a strength born of her journey. When she descended to the dining room, she found Wade already waiting. He'd shaved and changed into clean clothes, his dark hair still damp from washing. He rose as she approached, his eyes warming appreciatively as they took in her appearance. "You look lovely," he said simply, pulling out her chair. The dining room was nearly empty, just a couple of local businessmen at one table and a traveling salesman at another. They ordered a simple meal of beefsteak, potatoes, and bread plain fare that seemed a feast after trail rations. "I visited the general store while you were resting," Wade mentioned as they ate, "restocked our supplies, and I asked about the stage to Boise." Lillian's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh, leaves day after tomorrow. I've secured you a ticket." He reached into his pocket and placed it on the table between them. "Thank you," she managed, staring at the small slip of paper that represented her uncertain future. "It's the least I could do." Wade hesitated, then continued. "I've also sent a telegram to Sheriff Donovan in Helena. He'll keep an eye out for Mercer and his men, make sure they don't double back to cause trouble." Lillian nodded, grateful for his thoroughness yet saddened by the practicality that signaled their imminent parting. "And you?" she asked, meeting his gaze. "Will you continue to Helena tomorrow?" Wade studied his plate for a moment before answering. "That was my plan." Was. The past tense hung between them, laden with possibility. Their meal concluded in weighted silence, both seemingly lost in thought. As they stood to leave the dining room, Wade cleared his throat. "Would you walk with me? The evening's pleasant, and there's a small park near the church." Lillian agreed readily, desperate to prolong their time together. They strolled side by side through the quiet town, close but not touching, the air between them charged with unspoken words. The park turned out to be little more than a grove of cottonwoods with a single bench, but it offered privacy and a view of the mountains turning purple in the fading light. "Lillian," Wade began as they sat, his voice unusually hesitant, "these past days have been unexpected," she finished when he faltered. "In many ways." He turned toward her, their knees nearly touching on the narrow bench. "I didn't plan this, any of it, nor did I." Lillian smiled softly. "When I fled my brother's ranch, I certainly didn't expect to find." She trailed off, uncertain how to describe what had grown between them. "A friend," Wade suggested. "More than that, I think." Lillian's boldness surprised even herself. Wade's eyes darkened. "Lillian Rose, in 3 days you've appended everything I thought I knew about my path forward." He took her hand gently. "I was headed to Helena to take a job as a ranch foreman. Steady work, good pay, the sensible choice. And now I find myself contemplating choices that have nothing to do with sense and everything to do with what I feel when I look at you." Lillian's heart hammered against her ribs. "And what do you feel?" Like a man who's been wandering for years, suddenly glimpsing home. His words, so simple and profound, brought tears to Lillian's eyes. "I've never believed in swift attachments," she admitted. "Always thought love was something that grew slowly over years. And now I wonder if perhaps the heart sometimes recognizes in moments what the mind would take years to understand." Wade lifted his free hand to her face, his calloused thumb gently brushing away a tear that had escaped. "I can't offer you much, Lillian. I'm not a wealthy man, but I swear I'd never treat you as property, never make decisions for you rather than with you." "Those things matter more than wealth," she whispered. The distance between them vanished as Wade leaned forward, his lips finding hers in a kiss so tender it made her heart ache. His hand cradled her cheek as though she were something precious, something to be cherished rather than possessed. When they parted, Lillian felt breathless, transformed. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice unsteady. Wade's expression grew serious. "I won't ask you to change your plans because of feelings that are still new, still uncertain. You should go to your cousins as intended. Take the time you need." Disappointment warred with respect for his consideration. "And you, I'll continue to Helena as planned. Take the foreman position. It's good, steady work that could support." He hesitated. "Could support a future if you decide that's what you want." "And if I do?" Lillian pressed, needing to hear him say it. Wade smiled, the expression transforming his rugged features. "Then write to me, or come to Helena, and we'll discover together what this might become." They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, the evening's revelations creating a bubble of private joy around them. At her door, Wade kissed her once more, a promise and a farewell wrapped in one tender gesture. "Good night, Lillian Rose," he murmured against her hair. "Good night, Wade Garrison." She slept little that night, her mind too full of possibilities, her heart too full of newfound emotions. By morning, she had made her decision. When Wade knocked on her door to escort her to breakfast, Lillian was ready, her carpet bag packed beside her. "I'd like to accompany you to Helena," she announced without preamble. "Not to my cousins in Idaho." Wade's expression shifted from surprise to cautious joy. "Are you certain? What of your plans?" "My plan was to escape a future chosen for me by others," Lillian replied steadily. "To find freedom and perhaps someday love. I believe Helena offers both those possibilities." Wade studied her face, searching for doubt and finding none. "It won't be easy. The ranch where I'm to work is remote, the winter's harsh." "I'm not afraid of hard work or cold winters," Lillian said with a smile. "I'm a Montana rancher's daughter, remember? What of your brother, Mercer and his men? William will have to accept my decision in time. As for Mercer," she shrugged. "Helena is further from my brother's reach than Boys, and I'll have a former Texas Ranger at my side. I'd say my odds have improved considerably." Wade's slow smile was like sunrise breaking across his features. "There's something I should do properly then." To Lillian's surprise, he lowered himself to one knee in the hotel hallway, taking her hand in his. "Lillian Rose, I know we've known each other only days, not years. I know the sensible course would be to wait to be certain, but my heart is already certain, even if my head counsels patience." Lillian's free hand flew to her mouth, eyes widening. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer," Wade continued. "Only that you consider becoming my wife when you feel ready, be it weeks, months, or years from now. I'll wait as long as needed and court you properly in the meantime." Tears blurred Lillian's vision as she looked down at this man who had changed her life in mere days. "Yes," she whispered, "not weeks or months from now. Yes, now and always." Wade surged to his feet, gathering her into his arms with a laugh of pure joy. "You're certain, truly certain?" "I've spent my life being cautious, practical," Lillian replied, framing his face with her hands. "For once, I want to follow my heart without hesitation." Their kiss sealed the promise, witnessed only by the morning sun streaming through the hallway window. They departed Silver Creek that afternoon, riding side by side toward Helena and their shared future. The path ahead was uncertain, but Lillian felt only excitement where once she would have felt fear. 3 days later, they arrived in Helena, dusty and tired but filled with anticipation. The territorial capital was larger and more bustling than Lillian had expected, with brick buildings lining the main streets and the grand territorial courthouse dominating the skyline. Sheriff Donovan, Wade's friend from his ranger days, greeted them warmly. A grizzled man with kind eyes, he listened to their story with interest. "So you're the woman Wade's telegrams mentioned," he said, studying Lillian with approval. "You've made quite an impression on our stoic friend here." Lillian blushed, but met his gaze squarely. "The impression is mutual, Sheriff. And now you're to be married, Donovan grinned at Wade. Never thought I'd see the day you'd settle down, Garrison, nor did I, Wade admitted, his hand finding Lillian's. Life has a way of surprising us. They were married 3 days later in the small church near the courthouse, with Sheriff Donovan and his wife as witnesses. Lillian wore a simple blue dress purchased from Helena's finest dress shop, and Wade a new shirt and string tie that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken with conviction that belied their short courtship. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lillian felt a profound sense of rightness, as if her life had been leading to this moment all along. They spent their wedding night at Helena's grandest hotel, an extravagance Wade insisted upon despite Lillian's protests that they should save their money. In the privacy of their room, their coming together was both tender and passionate, a culmination of the connection that had sparked between them from the beginning. After, as Lillian lay in Wade's arms, watching moonlight pattern the sheets, she felt a contentment she'd never known before. "No regrets," Wade murmured against her hair. "None," she replied truthfully. Only that I didn't find you sooner." They reported to the Diamond G Ranch the following day, where Wade was to serve as foreman. The owner, Cornelius Grant, was a gruff but fair man who had made his fortune in mining before turning to cattle. "Didn't expect you'd be bringing a wife, Garrison," he remarked upon their arrival, eyeing Lillian with surprise. "Recent developments, sir," Wade replied. "I hope it won't be a problem." Grant stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Can she cook?" "Better than most," Lillian answered for herself, straightening her spine. "Can she ride? Handle herself on a ranch? I was raised on a cattle ranch, Mr. Grant. I know my way around livestock and can work from sunup to sundown without complaint." Grant's weathered face broke into an unexpected smile. "Well now, that changes things. Been needing someone to manage the main house and oversee the cooking for the hands. Position comes with additional pay and the cabin by the creek rather than the foreman's quarters in the bunkhouse." Wade glanced at Lillian, who nodded eagerly. "We accept, Mr. Grant." Their cabin, while small, was solidly built and situated on a rise overlooking a picturesque creek. Pine forest surrounded 3 sides, with the ranch's main buildings visible in the distance. It was more private than Lillian could have hoped, with a small garden plot that she immediately began planning to cultivate. Life settled into a rhythm of hard work and simple pleasures. Wade managed the ranch's day-to-day operations with skill and fairness that quickly earned him the respect of the other hands. Lillian took to her role overseeing the main house and cookhouse with equal dedication, introducing innovations that improved efficiency and morale. In the evenings, they would sit on their cabin's small porch, watching the Montana sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple. Sometimes they spoke of their days, sharing triumphs and challenges. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. As autumn approached, bringing crisp air and the promise of winter, Lillian received a letter forwarded from Silver Creek. She recognized William's handwriting immediately and opened it with trembling fingers. Wade watched her read, concern etching his features. "Bad news." Lillian looked up, tears in her eyes but a smile on her lips. "No, good news, I think. William writes that he was wrong, that after Mercer returned with news of my departure, he realized what he'd done." She scanned the letter again. "He says he sent Harrington away and is trying to save the ranch himself through honest work. He asks for my forgiveness." "And do you forgive him?" Wade asked gently. Lillian considered the question seriously. "I think I do. He was wrong, terribly wrong. But he's my brother and he's trying to make amends." She folded the letter carefully. "He asks for my address, says he'd like to write regularly, perhaps even visit someday." Wade nodded slowly. "Family is important. If you wish to rebuild that relationship, I'll support you." Lillian moved into his embrace, resting her head against his chest. "Thank you, for understanding, for everything." That winter proved harsh, as Wade had warned, with blizzards that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Yet Lillian found joy in the enforced intimacy. In evenings spent before their cabin's fireplace, reading aloud from the books Wade brought from Helena, or simply talking about their hopes for the future. It was during one such evening, as snow piled against their windows and wind howled around the eaves, that Lillian shared her most momentous news. "I believe we'll need to prepare the second bedroom sooner than we planned," she said, watching Wade's expression carefully. He looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. "You mean," Lillian nodded, her hand moving to her still flat stomach. "Dr. Saunders confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We're to have a child in early summer." Wade's face transformed with wonder and joy. He crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms with gentle reverence. "A child," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child." They spent the remainder of the winter preparing Wade expanding their cabin with Mr. Grant's blessing and assistance from the ranch hands. Lillian sewing tiny garments and planning the garden that would feed their growing family. Spring arrived with its usual Montana drama, snowstorms giving way overnight to balmy days, creeks swelling with runoff, wildflowers carpeting meadows in riotous color. As Lillian's body changed with her advancing pregnancy, she found herself marveling at how much her life had transformed in a single year, from near captivity to freedom, from loneliness to love, from uncertainty to purpose. William visited in late April, arriving with awkward formality that soon gave way to genuine reconciliation. He stayed a week, helping Wade with ranch work and gradually rebuilding his relationship with Lillian. When he departed, it was with promises to return when his niece or nephew arrived. "You're happy," he observed the night before he left, as they sat on the cabin porch watching fireflies dance near the creek. "Truly happy." "I am," Lillian confirmed, her hand resting on her rounded belly. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." William nodded, regret and affection mingling in his expression. "Then I'm glad you ran away, glad you found Wade." "So am I," she replied simply. Their daughter, Elizabeth Rose Garrison, was born on a perfect June morning, just as dawn light filtered through the cabin windows. She arrived with surprising ease after a relatively short labor, announcing her presence with lusty cries that made the midwife laugh. "Strong lungs," the older woman declared. "She'll be a forceful one, this girl." When Wade was finally allowed into the bedroom, his face was a study in awe and terror. He approached the bed hesitantly, as though afraid Lillian and the bundle in her arms might disappear if he moved too quickly. "Come meet your daughter," Lillian said softly, pulling back the blanket to reveal a tiny face with Wade's dark hair and what already seemed to be Lillian's determined chin. Wade sat carefully on the bed's edge, one calloused finger gently stroking the baby's velvet cheek. "She's perfect," he whispered, "like her mother. We'll name her Elizabeth," Lillian said, "after your sister." Tears filled Wade's eyes as he nodded. "Elizabeth Rose, a beautiful name for a beautiful girl." As summer waned into autumn, and autumn gave way to another winter, their small family settled into new routines. Elizabeth Ellie, as they came to call her, grew and thrived, her personality emerging as determined and curious as they had predicted. Wade proved to be a devoted father, carrying Ellie with him around the ranch whenever possible, introducing her to horses and cattle with the same patience he had once shown a wild Arabian stallion. In the evenings, he would rock her to sleep, singing old cowboy songs in his deep, soothing voice. Lillian watched them together and marveled at how completely love had transformed her life. The brother who had once tried to sell her to settle debts now visited regularly, doting on his niece. The ranch that had been merely a place of employment had become home. The man who had been a chance encounter on the trail had become the center of her world. One evening, as they sat before the fire with Ellie sleeping peacefully in her cradle nearby, Wade turned to Lillian with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, "running away? Choosing this life instead of the security Harrington could have provided?" Lillian considered the question seriously, as was her way. "Not for a single moment," she answered finally. "Security without love, without choice, is merely a prettier cage." Wade nodded, drawing her closer. "When I said you promised nothing to Harrington, I never imagined all you would come to promise me." "And what have I promised you?" Lillian asked, smiling. "Your trust, your partnership, your love." Wade kissed her gently. "Promises freely given are the only ones worth having." Outside, Snow began to fall, soft and silent in the Montana night. Inside their cabin, warmed by firelight and love, Lillian Rose Garrison thanked whatever fate or providence had led her to flee her brother's ranch exactly when a former Texas Ranger happened to be camping along her path. Some would call it chance, others destiny. Lillian simply called it the beginning of her true life, one where she made her own choices, followed her own heart, and found, in the process, a love more profound than she had ever dared to dream possible.